Hello everyone, welcome to Sociology. This is your first lecture. We're going to start going over Chapter 1. And hopefully my goal is to have 2 to 3 relatively short lectures for pretty much the entire semester. So I hope that this helps, and I hope this is something that you can use. So let's go ahead and get started with Chapter 1. Kind of the big question is, I want everybody to think for just a moment. What exactly did you think sociology was before you got into the course? And that's a question I think that a lot of students ask themselves. When I actually teach this course, one thing I like about it is that sociology is a course that a lot of students don't really know what it is, and so as a result, it's a little bit easier to get students motivated about it. And so I also teach history, and students walk in with a very negative attitude about history. And so, I have to fight that. In sociology, that's usually not the case. Most students are pretty open-minded about it. So that's one reason why I like teaching it. And so Chapter 1 is sort of an overview of what sociology is and kind of gives you a taste for what exactly we're going to do for the rest of the semester. So this first lecture is going to deal basically with what sociology is, and we're going to talk a little bit about, as far as sociology goes as a definition. And what sociology is, as you can see here on the screen, it's a scientific study of social structure and social interaction and all of the factors making for change in social structure and social interaction. And this is the definition that your sociology textbook gives you. The definition that I actually prefer is that sociology is essentially the study of social behavior as it relates to what's going on around you. So, like, for example, how is your behavior affected by each particular social setting in which you find yourself? So, like, how's your behavior changed from being at a football game to being at church to being at school? And then furthermore, what are some of the rules that go into those particular social settings, and how do you know what those rules are? Where did you learn them from? What different things govern the interactions you have with other people? And then taking it a step further on a much larger scale, what about our society affects how you behave? For example, what unique aspect about being from South Alabama does that have an impact on your behavior as opposed to if you were from the state of Maine or something like that? And then even on a much larger scale, how does being an American affect your behavior and the choices that you make and how you interact with other people? And so all of these questions deal specifically with what sociologists are interested in. The thing I like about sociology is that if it's behavioral in nature, we're interested in it. So, I mean, we study everything from very boring things such as why students major in certain things, or something even more boring like organizational structures of business, all the way to fun stuff, or I shouldn't say fun, but things that you guys would find more interesting, like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. We're interested in everything, and I can guarantee you that it doesn't matter what your interest is, you can find a sociological connection to it. All right, so couple of different, I guess you can say, general concepts right here at the very beginning is that, number one, sociology is a science. And what makes sociology a science is that we use the scientific method basically just like a biologist or a chemist would. And the way that works in sociology, and Chapter 2 deals with this more specifically, is that we use the scientific method to create consistency. So let's say that, for example, you wanted to study texting habits of 18-year-old females, okay? And then let's say 2 years down the road, somebody else wants to do that exact same study. Well, if you basically did the study and used an entirely different method to do it, then the results would be different, and it would be hard for you to compare the two studies to determine which one is more accurate or which one had better results. But if you're using that scientific method and you use the exact same steps with every single thing that you're going to study, then what you can do is you can compare the studies, one against the other. It's comparing an apple to an apple as opposed to an apple to an orange. So that's why the scientific method is critical. And with the scientific method, we as sociologists, we begin with a hypothesis, we do observations, we do experiments, all the way up through the actual conclusions. So So we really use the same exact process that any other scientist would use. And so sociology in and of itself is definitely a social science. Another thing that we're really interested in here is, of course, the concept of social structure. Okay, so and what social structure is it is the framework on which society is constructed. The best way that I can describe social structure for you, it says here, we are members of social units, a structure that endures over time. And that doesn't really tell you a lot. But essentially what social structure is, if you could think about a house being constructed, okay? And the completed house is society, okay? The completed house is society. And think about all of the different parts that make up the house, everything from the siding to the carpet to the shingles on the roof. A completed house is society, okay? However, the social structure is the frame that house is built on, okay? So what are the basics? What are the different aspects that make up the frame of that house? Like when you think about what really are the most important components of society, well, one thing, take for example, is language. Language, in order for society to exist, we must be able to communicate. And so language then is an important aspect of social structure. Culture is an important aspect of social structure. So social structure is our second key concept here of sociology. Our third key concept is, of course, social interaction. Like I said a moment ago, social interaction is, of course, key to how we communicate with one another. And again, what are the rules that determine that? Who do you choose to interact with, and what aspects of interaction, of course, do you have with that individual? And then finally is social change. Social change, of course, is the last of our four key concepts, and it says here, continuity and change are normal features of social life. And whether we like it or not, change is inevitable. You do have those people that fight change, and you do have those people that embrace change, but at the end of the day, change is going to happen. And so that change has an impact, excuse me, all right, so I apologize for that interruption. Anyway, as I was saying, social change, of course, is a key aspect of society. It's a major factor, because think about this. So what if think about how cell phones have changed the concept of our culture, particularly with regard to text messaging. Text messaging is something that largely nobody did 10 years ago, and now, of course, it's a pretty common everyday occurrence. And how has text messaging altered human behavior and society as a whole? That's an example of social change that's very, very important for you to note. Okay, so social change, again, is that fourth key concept. So again, four key concepts of sociological are, again, sociology is a science. Of course, social structure is one of the major components that we, of course, study, interaction, and then change. Okay? All right, as far as the origins of sociology go, sociology emerges during the Industrial Revolution, and the reason why that happens is that all right, so the reason why sociology emerges during the Industrial Revolution is mainly because life was changing in significant ways. Think about how life was changing from the Industrial Revolution, or from agricultural society to industrial society. Think about how day-to-day life changes. For the first time ever, you're going to work. You're going from the farm to the city. You have, of course, you no longer have large tracts of land. You no longer have that 7-day-a-week position that farming, of course, demands. You now have leisure time because you're working a set schedule. Furthermore, living in a city has its own problems, everything from crime to pollution to all sorts of things. So people's lives were changing in very dramatic ways. And again, all of that centered around the concept of technology. As technology improves, again, we know that our social lives change in very dramatic ways. And so the Industrial Revolution is kind of the onset of that type of change. And so because of the Industrial Revolution, we're going to see people start asking questions. asking questions about social life, asking questions about, how life is essentially arranged. Okay. Another aspect, another thing that will, of course, have an impact on sociology popping up again are social and political changes. Take the American Revolution, for example. Think about how life was different in the United States prior to the Revolution and then after the Revolution. Of course, there's different aspects of behavior, different aspects um, of, uh, of activities, different expectations, all of which are centered around the concept of changes in life that come from the American Revolution, along with, of course, the French Revolution. And these revolutions, particularly in America and France, again, lead people to ask questions about, how social life is going to be arranged, how um, um, how we should interact with our government, with our what rules and laws should exist, what behaviors are appropriate, not appropriate, and et cetera, et cetera. So those are the two main movements within the world that will lead us to start asking questions about social life. So the Industrial Revolution, again, those social and political changes. All right, so sociology finally emerges, which is this last bullet point here. Sociology emerges, and again, you have three main individuals who will have a role in getting sociology to begin. Okay, so the first one is a fellow named Auguste Comte. Okay, Auguste Comte, and that's Augustecomte. And again, he's in the textbook. And Comte is considered to be the founder of sociology. And Comte, of course, was particularly affected by things like the French Revolution because he's French. Again, the Industrial Revolution. He sees that social life changing. People's lives are becoming very different as a result of working in cities and factories. And so he starts asking questions, and he actually proposes the idea that social life could be studied using the scientific method. Okay? He actually proposes that this could be done. He never actually does it, which is interesting. He just proposes that it could be done. And so because of this, because he kind of comes up with this idea, he does get credit for being the father of sociology, even though he never actually participated in what we think of as sociology, the science. The second person that I want to mention is a lady named Harriet Martineau. Again, she's in your textbook if you want to see the spelling. She's also in your study guide. But Harriet Martineau, she was an English woman. She comes from a very wealthy family, and unlike most women, Harriet really had no desire to get married or live a life that most women, lived at the time. What Harriet wanted to do is she wanted to go off and she wanted to be a journalist, and that was something that women could actually pursue. And Harriet was particularly interested in what was going on in the United States, and so as a result, she paid her way to the United States. Well, she came here in about the 1830s. And when she came to the United States, she found that there was still slavery, there were still, women had very few rights. And in Europe, she'd always heard that the United States was this land of opportunity. When in reality, she saw American culture as rather hypocritical, because here we are saying that in our founding documents, all men are created equal, but yet women and, of course, African Americans are largely subjected. And so as a result, she writes a book called Retrospective Western Travel. And what she determines in this book is that American culture has its flaws. American culture has its problems. But, and everything she says is largely accurate. In fact, it's probably one of the best examples of American social life during this time. It's a real piece of sociology. That being said, she gets, she sort of gets criticized for being overly critical. And she does come back later, and she's a little bit more forgiving in her second book. But what she says is that the United States would actually be a really great place if they would work on these problems, like slavery and like women's rights. The last person I want to mention is Herbert Spencer. Now, Herbert Spencer is not on your study guide, but I do feel like he's important to mention. And Herbert is, he's the one that comes up with the concept of social Darwinism. If you've ever heard this term, social Darwinism, Herbert Spencer is the one that actually coins that term. He also coins the term survival of the fittest, and we typically associate that with Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is what we typically associate, the origin of species. However, it's really Herbert Spencer that comes up with these terms as he's applying them to social life. And so, again, Spencer's well known for this social Darwinistic idea, survival of the fittest, and he applies it to social life by saying this, that those who are most suited to essentially adapt to social life are the ones that will be most successful. And those who are unable to adapt to social life are the ones who will not be as successful. So, for example, if you apply this to the poor and poverty, Spencer would say that those people who are homeless are the ones who were not as equipped to adapt to the society in which they lived. And that's essentially how social Darwinism works. Again, survival of the fittest. And this is really common for ideas at the time, because if you think about things like a work ethic, Protestant work ethic, that if you work really hard, God will reward you. Well, of course, from Spencer's perspective, if you remove the religious component of God, if you work really hard, you will be rewarded. And so that idea prevails through that social Darwinistic idea that the harder you work, the more successful you be. Again, survival of the fittest. All right, so now we're going to kind of move into more of our classic our more classical sociologists. Okay, so the first gentleman I'm going to talk about is Karl Marx. Okay, so the first three people that I mentioned, again, they were essentially the founders of the field. The people that I'm mentioning now, starting with Karl Marx, are considered to be the true founders of the field, in that they're the ones that actually did sociology. Okay, the first one's Karl Marx, and you can see here he was a German philosopher, social critic, and essentially he considered himself more of an economist that sociology is sort of adopted. But what he spent a lot of his time studying is the struggle between owners and workers. Okay, in other words, the study of people who, of course, were working in the factory versus people who own the factories. Keep in mind there's this connection to the Industrial Revolution. And what he found is that those who, of course, owned the means of production, okay, were just getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And those who were, the ones whose labor really allowed those profits to grow, were largely being punished, or it seemed to be that they were being punished, that they were, harsh working conditions, long hours, no job security, and so as you can see, lots of problems associated with that lifestyle. And so Marx started writing a lot about how to overcome this kind of concept, and what it'll eventually develop into is communism. Of course, what the communism as we know it that actually develops is not exactly what Marx would have approved of, but at the end of the day, it is this idea that workers should be the owners of the means of production, not, there shouldn't be these super wealthy people, that everyone should be equal. And that's the concept that Marx advocated for. He said that because of the way society developed in a capitalist society, people have no control over their lives, that it all depends on the wealthy. They're the ones that kind of control everything. And so he will be the founder of one of sociology's major perspectives, which is called conflict theory. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but it begins with this conflict that exists between the workers and, again, the owners. Okay. The next fella is Emile Durkheim, and again, Emile Durkheim, another huge influential sociologist. And in a few moments we'll talk about, or in the next lecture we'll talk about the different perspectives, the sociological perspectives, and he's associated with the functionalist perspective. Durkheim, of course, looked at society and the way that society is organized. That's what he was particularly interested in. And he noted that society develops in two different ways, or at least that society is held together by two different models. He has what's called mechanical solidarity and organic solidarity. These are the two ways that society is held together. And that in mechanical solidarity, these are more traditional societies, agricultural in nature, less advanced, less developed, and that they're united through social similarities. So in other words, if you think about like a Native American tribe, that would be mechanical solidarity, that belonging to the group depends more on kinship and heritage than actual skills. Okay, so like under a mechanical solidarity system, an outsider couldn't just walk up and say, I want to be a member of your tribe. and so very exclusive of other people. Okay, but as society grows larger, it becomes more and more difficult, again, to unite society based on these similarities and ideas of kinship. So he says that society eventually moves into what's called, or becomes more organized under what he calls organic solidarity. Okay, where societies, of course, are united by interdependence. In other words, if you think about society today, if you move, let's say, if you move from Dothan to, Huntsville, Alabama, for example, you didn't move very far, but once you got there, everyone would pretty much speak English. You could buy a house, you could buy a car, you could get a job, and you could pretty much participate in society with very little friction. And it's because, let's say, assume that you major in engineering and you get an engineering job up there. Your role in society is based more on what you're able to offer society than than just belonging to the group by some random chance of being born into that group. Okay, and that's what organic solidarity is. Now, as again society changes, of course, he observed that some people, of course, had harder times adapting to that change than others. And he said, as a result, that sometimes if you're unable to adapt to the demands of society, he said that you would suffer from what's called anomie. Okay, and that's that third word there, anomie. And what anomie is it's a sense of disconnectedness. Now it says here, rapid social change leads to a loss of social norms and produces many social problems. But a way to think about anomie is it's just a sense of disconnectedness. You're not as integrated into society. And the way that he showed that anomie existed is that he noted that people who, of course, commit suicide are the ones who tend to be more and more disconnected from society, more and more removed. In other words, it's single men without children, without a job. Those are the ones who are more likely to commit suicide. Young men versus very, very old men also are very likely to commit suicide. They've lost their loved one. They're retired. They don't have a sense of purpose. And so as you are disconnected from society and you have fewer roles in society, you have that sense of almost a lack of purpose, a lack of drive. Okay, and so that's what anomie is. And Durkheim, of course, suicide is the concept that he used to show this in his sociological research. It's a fascinating idea, and his studies still hold true today. The next influential sociologist we're going to mention is a fellow named Max Weber. And Max Weber is typically associated with conflict theory. And the thing that he comes up with that's sort of his grand contribution is the concept of rationalization. He says here, traditional societies emphasize emotion and personal ties. Modern societies, however, emphasize calculation, efficiency, self-control. Personal ties decline and people become disenchanted is the word that he uses. A good way to think about this is like, for example, think about small town America. Think about a small town where you have you have a hardware shop and you have maybe a clothing shop and you have all these different stores, again, that pretty much everybody knows everybody, this concept of Mayberry. And that's where it emphasizes very personal ties. In other words, you may be spending more money, but you get that personal touch. The shopkeeper knows you. The shopkeeper may give you special services because that you're a regular customer, and so you get that personal touch. However, when Walmart comes to town, Walmart again sells all of the same stuff, and they sell it for less expensive. And again, it does hurt those businesses, but what is Walmart interested in? Again, it's all about efficiency. It's all about profit. It's all about those kinds of ideas. And again, you can go to pretty much any Walmart in America and they all look the same. They all carry the same stuff. And that's what rationalization is. It's this focus on efficiency and quantity versus quality. Okay? And we see that rationalization affects lots of other aspects of our society. For example, take restaurants. That there are those local restaurants which you typically get a little more personal touch. You get food that you can't really get anywhere else. Where then you also have McDonald's, where every hamburger in McDonald's pretty much nationwide is all the same. Again, it's all about quantity as opposed to quality. And again, Weber would argue that we have rationalization in our work lives, rationalization in our religious life, and so on and so forth. And and again, we'll talk more about rationalization a little bit later. So when you think about this, when you compare the three that I just mentioned, here are some attitudes that people might have based on different observations. For example, under Marx, the alienated person. I really don't care because I'm detached from my work and from other people. Where with Durkheim, the anomic person, I'm distressed by it because there are no common rules or norms to guide me. I feel disconnected. Okay? And the last part is Weber's rational person. Let me think about it and I'll get back to you later because I need to make some calculations before I know how to answer. And honestly, I don't really care for these different quotes. I mean, this is something your book provides. But it does show you different ideas. So like, for example, alienated, you don't feel that... you don't feel like you're as you don't feel like you have as much of a purpose, and so anomic is pretty much the same way, but as opposed to I don't care, which would be more of alienation or depression, an anomic is almost the sense of I'm disconnected, like I have no connections to other people, I have fewer friends, I don't really have anybody that I can turn to or talk to. And again, with rationalization is something entirely different in that it's more about quantity, it's more about sameness, homogeneity. All of those words, of course, would apply. Okay, so the next lecture is going to deal with different sociological perspectives in society. So I wanted to give you this first little lecture, and then so the next lecture, which should last about the same amount of time, we'll go over the different theories. Okay, well, you guys have a great day, and I'll be with you soon.